If we're looking at an angle that is over 90 degrees, then we have to take into account that sometimes the sine, the cos, the tan can be negative, depending on what quadrant that you're in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at the graph, the sine graph and the cosine graph, which are the two graphs that are over on the right hand side here. The top one is the sine graph and the bottom one is the cosine graph, or the cos graph. And we have then here our unit circle. And in our unit circle, to figure out if it's going to be a plus or a minus, we use what's called cast. And how we draw cast is we have our C in the fourth, our A in the first quadrant, our S in the second quadrant, and our T in the third. So in each quadrant then, depending on if you're using sine, cos and tan, some of them are positive, some of them negative. So what the A represents when we're doing this is the A represents all. And that means that everything is positive. That's sine, that's cos, and that's tan. So here for A, for A being positive, we have sine, we have cos, and we have tan. Now, specifically looking at sine and cos, we're going to use the graph just to see where this is coming from. So if we look at the sine graph from 0 to 90 degrees, we can see that it's above the x-axis, which is why it's positive. And when we look at the cos graph from 0 to 90 degrees, we can see that it's positive, which is why it's a plus. And we'll come to the tan at the end. For the sine for S then, what we have here is S in this quadrant here represents sine as being positive. So here we have sine is positive. In our third quadrant we have tan is positive, and in our fourth quadrant we have cos is positive. Now the A section is the only section where all three are positive. If in our quadrant 2 our sine is positive, that means that the other two are going to be negative, which is where the S comes from. And again, if we check over in our diagram for our sine between 0 and 180 degrees, we can see for our sine graph between 0 and 180 degrees, it's a plus, which is why sine is plus. Whereas for cos, we can see from 0 to 180 degrees is a minus, which is why cos is minus. We'll come again to the tan at the very end. For our tan, for our third quadrant, I should say, we have tan T being positive, which means that the other two, cos and sine, are both negative there. And let's take a look now at where that's coming from. We can see here that in our third quadrant from 0 to 100 or 270 degrees, that in our sine graph, as 180 to 270 degrees is going to be negative. So sine is negative. For cos, we also have negative because it's below the x-axis. And finally, for our third quadrant, we can see here that in our third quadrant we have a C, or sorry, our fourth quadrant we have a C. That means cos is positive, which means that the other two, which is sine and tan, they're both going to be negative. And why are they both going to be negative? Well, specifically looking at the 270 to 360 for the sine graph, we can see it's below the x-axis, which is why it's negative. And for the 270 to 360, it's above the x-axis, which is why it's positive. Now let's specifically look at the tan. If you look on your log tables on page 13, we'll see that the tan of the angle is equal to the sine of the angle over the cos of the angle. It's on the very top right. So if I look at my quadrant 1, and I know that I'm looking for tan of the angle, I put sine of the angle over cos of the angle. Sine of the angle is a plus, cos of the angle is a plus, which means that tan will also be plus. For quadrant 2, I can see tan of the angle there will be sine over cos. That's going to be a plus sine and a minus cos, which gives me a minus then for my tan in the second quadrant. If we look at quadrant 3, we can see that tan of our angle here is going to be a minus because the sine is minus, and a minus on the bottom because the cos is minus as well. And minus over minus will give me a plus, which is why tan is positive there. In our fourth and final quadrant, the tan of the angle will be sine, which is a negative, over cos, which is a positive. So we end up with a negative answer there as well, and that's why we have tan is a minus. So now that we have seen that, we're going to move over to our previous sheet and take a look at how this is going to be used. So looking at this here, again using the page 13 or using the previous page, the notes, we're now going to take a look at this question on the top. It asks us to find the cos of 135. So our first step there, it says draw a quick sketch of the unit circle. Now you don't need to draw the actual circle. What I will be drawing here is a little plus sign with my CAST, my cast. I will then check what quadrant 135 is in. It's going to be between the 90 and the 180, and I draw a little line in. And I know that all of these come from 0 degrees. So the 135 is 0 to 135 degrees. But we're only ever using the distance from the x-axis. That's our reference angle. So we need to find what this reference angle is. How we do that is we take our 180, because that's what this length is here, 180 degrees. And we subtract our 135, leaving us with is 45 degrees. So what I'm really looking for in my tables on page 13 is I'm looking for what is the cos of 45 degrees. This is known as my reference angle. And once I check the cos of 45 degrees, I see that the cos of 45 degrees is going to be 1 over the root of 2. My final step then is to check what quadrant this is in. So it's in the second quadrant. And if it's in the second quadrant, sine is positive, which means that cos and tan are negative. So the answer for the cos of 135 is not going to be 1 over root 2. It's going to be minus 1 over root 2 for a finish. So if you want to now pause the video and try the next two, you can. I'm going to jump straight into them and get through them. So our first one here, again, I draw my cast, C-A-S-T, and I look for my 300. So I'm looking for 300. 300 is going to be in the fourth quadrant. So I draw my line. And my 300 degrees is always starting at 0, and it's going the full way around. So there's 300 degrees. So what I'm going to do then is I want to find how far it is from the x-axis. So if the green arrow is 300 degrees, that leaves 60 degrees out of 360. So what I'm really looking for is the tan of 60 degrees. And again, I can use my log tables to get that. And the tan of 60 degrees is the square root of 3. That's my reference angle. So I'll write my reference angle. So do write the reference angle down as well. Reference angle equals 60. And I have tan of 60 is equal to the root 3. Now remember, we're not looking for the tan of 60, we're looking for the tan of 300. So I check my quadrant, and I can see the quadrant that I'm in is the last quadrant. That's where the line is. That's where the 300 is. That's a C. And C means cos. That means everything else is going to be negative. That's tan and sine. Which means that when I'm looking for the tan of 300, it's not just root 3, it's negative root 3. For our last one underneath, again, I draw my plus symbol. And I write in my cast. And I check and see that actually should be 240. Sorry, just if you used 220. That should be 240. 240 is down in this quadrant in here. And I know that from here to here is 240. Now all I'm looking for is this section here. And I know that all of this is 180. So I'm going to say 180, take away that 240, the difference between the two. And the difference between the two is going to be 60 degrees. So now my reference angle is 60 degrees. Which means I'm looking for the cos of 60 degrees. And again, you can use the calculator if you want, but I generally use the log tables just to get used to using them. And we're looking for our cos of 60 is going to equal to a half. Finally then, I double check and see what quadrant are we in. We're in the third quadrant, that is T. Tan is the only positive there. So cos is going to be a negative. So my actual answer for the cos of 240 is negative a half.